I am Holly Burton. I'm a leadership coach for women in male-dominated industries. I am also the founder of WIMDI, and I am very excited to have you all here tonight because I have been in your shoes. I was a mining engineer for the first 10 years of my career, and I am a huge nerd about feminism, a huge nerd about career, a huge nerd about leadership. Tonight is basically the culmination of all the things that I am nerdy about, except for rocks. They didn't make it into tonight's presentation, but give me time. I'm sure I'll get some kind of mining references in there eventually. But I'm very excited to have you all here to learn with me. All right, friends, what I do can be summed up in this graph. Some of you will already have seen this graph, but for those of you who have not, this devastating little number is a very sad indictment of the current state of many of our industries. So the yellow line here shows the retention of women professionals generally in their career over time from 0 to 20 years along the x-axis. And then that pink line is women in STEM. Now you can notice they're very far apart and that the pink line is devastatingly steep. Yuck. Right. And so everything that I do in my career with WIMDI and with my leadership coaching, and hopefully with tonight's presentation, is to bring that pink line closer to the yellow line, because I find it really devastating because I've been on this line. I lived on this line right there at the 10-year mark when I left the mining industry. I'm represented here because I'm somebody who left, along with, probably, I don't know, 40-ish% of my peers had already left by that point. And so, this is the glass ceiling in a chart in some ways. This is the reason why we don't see lots of women in leadership, is because of this. By the time they get into really high levels of leadership, they're already gone. So I want that to change. And tonight, one of the things we're going to talk about is a way to change that. It may not be all of the graph, but it will be some of it. And I hope that you will find it very helpful. Okay, so on to our topic, how leadership training creates the glass ceiling. So there's this interesting shift that happens in our careers as we move up the chain of command or the leadership ladder or whatever it is that you want to call it. When we move through this progression from individual contributor through manager to director to VP roles and into the C-suite, there's this interesting divide that happens really early on, just before you get into management. And that is that you stop creating results through yourself and you start creating results through other people. So this is a really interesting time in a person's career, because up until this point, the world's kind of been your oyster in some ways, right? Like if you want to go and create an outcome, you just go and do it. You write the code, or you create the mine plan that causes the rocks to be moved, or you do whatever it is that it is you do in your day job, right? So you're able to just go out and execute and create outcomes at work. But when you move into management, suddenly you don't have that ability as much anymore, or in theory, that's not how you're meant to do your job. Instead, you've got to cajole other people into doing the execution that you otherwise would be doing. And so this requires a completely different skill set. And it's usually not one that you learn about in school. And most of us in this room probably have gone to a 4-year degree program, maybe not all of us, but it's quite common that we'll go and learn all these technical skills that we need in order to do our main original job when we're individual contributors. And then we move into management and get nowhere near 4 years of training about it. So a lot of us feel a little freaked out by this transition. And those of you who want to share with us in the chat, let me know. Did you feel freaked out? Did you feel excited? Did you feel prepared? I know for me, I felt a mix of all of those things. I got my hands on every little management book I could read, read it until my eyes fell out of my head, and then, went in to face my team just terrified and hope that I did the right thing with these lovely people and hope that I didn't, injure them or screw it up. Yeah, Deborah says she was very frustrated. I also felt frustrated at times, Deborah, for sure. All right, so the solution to all of this in theory is leadership training. Hooray. So tonight we're going to take a deep dive into all of the intricacies of leadership training. And we'll talk about sort of some basic things that you tend to learn in leadership training. Lots of leadership trainings have different configurations, but I'll talk about one particular style of them that I think is the most common. So, in many leadership trainings, you'll cover, I think, the most essential skills, which are number one, inspiring and motivating others, because it's important that people actually feel like doing the work that you're going to give them. Otherwise, it's harder for them to get it done, and they tend not to. So if you're trying to actually create outcomes for other people, they've got to be motivated to do the outcomes, learn how to do that. You're also going to learn how to communicate your little butt off, because it's really essential when you're working with other human beings that they don't feel upset with you and that they don't feel totally lost and confused anytime you tell them to do something. So communication is a really essential piece of the puzzle. You also learn how to build relationships, because there will be times when you are not able to inspire and motivate someone to do something because it is boring or terrible or not that good for them, honestly. And you'll have to, even despite your best communication, build a good relationship with that person so that they're able to do the things that are like a little less than palatable, even when they'd rather not, and they do it anyways because you've put the work into building the relationship and creating a strong platform for you all to create together. You'll also learn about how to collaborate and foster teamwork, because again, this is no longer an individual operation. You have to do this with other people. And so there's lots and lots of work to prepare you for collaborating and working in a team. And you'll learn some self-development skills, because most of us come into leadership learning how to lead another group of people. And as we do that, we quickly learn usually that there's lots of things about us that need a little bit of work. Maybe we get really offended when people don't take our well-intentioned advice as a manager. Maybe we get completely stymied when we try to speak up in meetings with people who are much more powerful than us. These things tend to show up when we're on a bigger stage. And so as a result, we do lots of self-development work in leadership. And then finally, we work a lot on developing other people, because we've got this whole little team of minions under us. And it's really helpful if we can help them develop their skills and level up the way that they're working, because then we can use them to go and get more things done. So most leadership trainings cover some variation on this. You'll see other things sometimes added in or removed, but this is a really common kind of menu of things in the leadership training space. So how do we like it? How does the leadership training go? Well, the good news is most men really I feel pretty good about it. So this is a study from 2018 from an online learning company called 2DL. And they asked people how they felt about the learning and development options at work. And 75% of men said that they were either very satisfied or somewhat satisfied with their training options, which is a solid B. So not bad. Good job, corporate America. Just hitting those mid-high grades with men. And of course, you can probably guess by now, based on the fact that this is WIMDI and I've split out this poll by gender, that the women's results are going to be worse. So let's see what they are. 55%, not so good, a C-. Yikes. Women did not rate their satisfaction with the training options nearly as highly. And this is especially damning when you realize that it's a C- at satisfied or somewhat satisfied. Like it's not even really excited about it or loved it. It was kind of okay. And 55% of women, just more than a fail, felt that way about the training options available. So that's not ideal. What the heck, right? Because this is supposed to be the solution to all of our challenges, this leadership thing that we never learned how to do. We now get the opportunity to do it, except that we kind of hated the training. So what are we going to do about that? Well, here's the deal. Leadership training is designed to meet the needs of its customer. Just like any other consumer product, they look at who is likely to be involved, what their challenges are, and then they try to design to fit that. So who do we think our customer is here? Well, honestly, mostly dudes, right? So these are stats from the latest McKinsey and Lean In Women in the Workplace study. They do these every year. And these numbers have actually gone up. They used to be a lot worse. I was quite surprised when I looked these up to make this presentation because, yeah, these numbers were probably 10% worse, like 2 years ago or something like that. So we've picked up some ground here, but leadership training is by and large still mostly men, and has been mostly men for a very long time, ever since the early days back in the dinosaurs when, we were all training dinosaurs how to be good leaders. The leadership training then were, targeted to male dinosaurs, and now they're still targeted to male dinosaurs, just a little less of them. So what do men need? What do these, consumers that make up most of this market actually need? Well, soft skills, mostly, right? Men, as a rule, as a group, not all men, hashtag not all men, men as a rule don't get socialized as early and as often in all of the soft skills that you need to be a leader, whereas women often do. So these are the skills that we looked at before. And these are just not things, I'm just reading Deborah's chat about leadership training being emotional intelligence training. Yes, that's really, really common. And I think that that's a good example of something that is highly audience targeted emotional intelligence training for people who didn't learn it, right? And so, when you think about how boys are socialized very young, they're often socialized to be competitive as opposed to collaborative. They are often socialized to not be very good communicators. I think most women who have been in a heterosexual relationship before, or at least in a relationship with somebody who was socialized as a man when they were young or a boy when they were young, can attest to the communication being like a little less prolific and usually precise and also not very emotive. So communication can be a bit more of a challenge. And they don't do nearly as much self-development work. And I'm not trying to say that men aren't interested in self-development work, but that the patriarchy doesn't require it from them in the way that it does require it from women. So when we look at this list, these are things that women actually learn from a very young age as a way to cope with the way that the patriarchy kind of hems them in, right? So, we don't often have access to a ton of explicit power. We are often using, communication or informal channels to create the outcomes that we're looking for rather than command and control power from the top down. We have to communicate excessively well to make sure that nobody's feelings are hurt because we are often socialized to be the caretakers of other people's emotions. And we work really hard to build relationships because that is a lot of how we get things done. Because again, command and control is less available to us. And along the way, we end up doing quite a lot of development of ourselves and development of others, development of ourselves, because without a position of power, without a position of privilege in society, we often have to mold ourselves to the situation as it is. So we get early practice at that from a young age. And in terms of developing others, we are often held out as kind of the therapists of the entire world, right? The concept of emotional labor is in some way just holding the emotions of other people, but there's also a piece of it that is about, quote unquote, man training, unfortunately, sometimes for some of us, right? So we often get a crash course in this pretty early, and men often don't. And then when it gets into leadership where they've got to play nice, and we all have to play nice, men need some training. And so we get some training. And let's see how this goes. Well, my fabulous client put it best a couple months ago. She attended a 2-day leadership training and she said it was basically useless. She didn't learn anything because she's been doing it all since she was 5. And so it was interesting, and it was done at a very prestigious place with a good name to it, but it was all kind of old hat for her. Yuck. And it's not really a surprise because she's kind of not wrong. There's a study done in 2019 by Zenger-Folkman that looked at 360 reviews and how men and women were rated in different leadership competencies. And so here's a sample of those. But the short version is women absolutely crushed it. They beat men on 17 out of 19 measures, which is very, very, very good percentage to win. And across the board, they were a little bit better at all these things. And this is really fascinating because actually only 42% of women report having access to leadership training at work versus 56% of men. So we kicked their butts, even though we were less likely to get training, we still came out on top, which is very, very sad, very, very sad, but speaks to the power of that early stage training that we get from our parents and from patriarchal society in a lot of these skills. So damn, like if you are sitting in my shoes, then you're like, well, obviously women are winning, right? Like get all of us in the C-suite immediately. We have all the best skills. It's clear that we should be running the whole world, like Beyonce says. But obviously, friends, the depressing truth is that no, that's not true at all. When you look at the C-suite, again, from the Women in the Workplace report, we see that it's actually 80% men, so far worse than it is at the individual manager level, and only 20% women. And the interesting thing about that is that it can get even worse than this. Like this slide is already so incredibly full of dudes. But if you look at the Fortune 500, well, then it's actually 92% men. And this is actually a shocking victory because this number is as low as it's ever been. We have a new record this year. In 2021, we have 8% of women in leadership, which is higher than it's ever been. And to put that in context, when I started in the mining industry 15 years ago, we had, well, so this year we've got 41 women out of 500 in the Fortune 500. Okay, there's 41 of us total. But when I started 15 years ago in the mining industry, we had 1/4 of that, 10 women, 2%. So hooray, we've done it. We've really arrived, ladies. Good job. And also it's still 92% dudes in the Fortune 500. I haven't seen the latest stats this year, tabulated up by name, but usually within a couple months of the list coming out, we'll see some headlines about how there's more men named John or Michael or insert common white man's name here than there are women on the Fortune 500. So that's kind of the state of leadership at the tippity top of corporate America. All dudes all the time. So why is that? And I'm going to say why is that with a huge asterisk, because actually I could talk for like 75,000 hours about the many, many reasons in which that's true. But tonight we're going to talk about just one. Well, two. We're going to talk about this graph. So this is something that I've become particularly obsessed about in the last little while. I have decided that I am now only interested in talking about leadership initiatives that move women towards the upper right-hand corner of this graph. I am no longer entertaining any discussion of things that move us towards the bottom left side because I feel it is useless. And we'll spend most of the rest of the conversation tonight talking about why this is the case. So, and just to put this into context, the bottom left here is mostly where leadership training puts us. It tends to move us in this bad direction that I'm no longer interested in, and it does not move us towards the side that I am. So let's talk about why the heck that's the case. I hope you're ready for a 45-minute rant. No, I'm kidding. This is going to be fun. All right, so there are two career-killing traps that we're going to explore tonight in relationship to that graph. Number one is called the natural skills trap, and you can probably tell from the quotation marks how I feel about this. So I'm going to tell you a little story about a client of mine. This is not this client's real name. We always change people's names and make sure that you don't have every single detail about them published on the internet for everybody to know. Okay, so this is my lovely client, Lana. Lana is an engineering team lead at a tech company, and she is wonderful. And in fact, Lana, you have already kind of met because she is this person. Lana is the one who attended the leadership training and didn't learn a single thing because she kind of already knew everything that they were teaching. So as you can tell, Lana is amazing and very powerful and exactly my kind of person. So her boss also thinks she's pretty great, right? She thinks that, like we've already discussed in this presentation, she's basically a natural at all that kind of HR stuff, he would say, all that people-y stuff. And then he reaches a dangerous conclusion. He goes, yeah, I bet she probably prefers that to technical work anyways, right? Like with her woman brain, probably true, I guess. And then he goes and has a conversation with her and says, hey, we love your leadership. She's like, yes, amazing news. So why don't we re-argue into non-technical management role? Sounds good, right? You can tell from Lana's face that we are excited about this. Well, look, this is some patriarchal bullshit, friends. I hate it. I hate it so much. And it happens all the time. Like, who in this room has had a version of this happen to them or seen this happen to somebody that they know? Probably most of us. And if it's not most of us by now, I'm seeing a whole bunch of people raise their hands. If it's not most of us by now, let's talk about why this is likely to be the case and is often the case. It's because it fits what we're quote unquote supposed to do. According to society, we are meant to be caretakers. We are meant to be people who serve other people's interests. We are meant to be people who are incredibly team-oriented, who care a lot about other people, who facilitate other people into greatness, as we've already talked about. And so when they see that we're good at it, and it fits the thing that we're supposed to do, and also fits the thing that we're supposed to like, because don't forget, there's a huge societal narrative about how much women love dealing with people stuff, which I'm not saying is untrue about us, but not necessarily true for every single one of us. Hashtag not all women. And they're not wrong, right? Like research bears it out. Like, yeah, we are pretty good at this stuff. We've been working on it for our entire lives. And it's incredibly common for this to happen, right? Many of us have already seen this. And in my career alone, this has happened so many times. I have, over the course of my 10-year careers in mining, had people decide that rather than being a mining engineer, I should be a product manager. Wasn't interested in that. Great job, but not for me. And definitely a poor use of my mining engineering skills. They wanted to put me in maintenance engineering. They wanted to make me an HR business partner. And then my favorite, they actually offered me an investor relations job at one point for $50,000 a year less than I was making as a mining engineer. And they were like, part-time, so that you can have a great, life and work-life balance. And I was like, I'm not interested. Never call me again. I'm incredibly insulted. Not that investor relations isn't an important job, but it is not the thing I should be doing with 10 years of mining engineering experience. Now, if you look at this list, you will probably detect a trend here, right? Which is that these are, by and large, way more people-y and way less technical than they used to be. Some of you might be going, well, maintenance, that's pretty not technical, but it's not really girly, quote unquote, right? It's, in mining industry, that means you're working with mechanics, dealing with giant pieces of machinery all the time. And the cool news about the maintenance engineering is that they wanted me to do that because I had gotten really, really good at manipulating the man babies who ran that department to improve their forecasting so that I could then go and do my budgets. And so I was very, very good at talking them and stroking their egos and making sure that they could go and change what they were doing so that they actually got better at their work. So they wanted me for my people-y way of handling maintenance engineering. Lovely. And as a reward, the men called me and my colleague Sabrina Miss Pushy Pants. So that was fun too. All right, so yeah, tons of this in my career, tons of this in many of our careers. And really what's going on here is that we sort of start leadership training. If you imagine us like a city, where we've got an overdeveloped set of, not overdeveloped, but more developed set of skills than most of the men around us. And so if this were a city, we would be the lonely skyscraper amongst a series of, under construction, mid and low rises that are still working their way up to their people skills, right? And, after they do some training, the guys kind of level up their skill set. We might level up our skill set too, but we're often still, as we can see from the results of that survey, head and shoulders above them. And the tough thing about that is that when someone comes looking to fill a people-focused management role, then we often get hit with what I call the non-technical job track lightning. Yikes. Because we are the highest thing around and we have been for some time. And so they go, who could do this? She can. She's really good at it. We'll put her in the job. Yuck. So look, the non-technical job track lightning is very deadly. It's not good. Not just because I've likened it to electrocution, but because it puts us on part of this, you remember my favorite graph? Part of this graph that I really don't love. So when we look at the work that we're doing, we can classify it in sort of two categories. Well, along a continuum between things that are really core to the business, really central to what we do, the way that we make money, or things that are supportive of that, not directly connected to revenue generating activities, but they help them occur. So some examples of that are on the core to the business side. We'll have, tech things, like if we're working for a tech company, creating a SaaS product, if we're sitting there writing code to code that SaaS product, it is literally the thing that is sold, right? We are working on the direct product that the customer buys. And so it's very related to core business. And the same is true of operations generally. If we are delivering product to clients, then we're very close to the core business. And on the other side, on the support angle, we're talking about things like HR and legal. So these are essential components. You probably can't do business without them to some extent, but they're not the main point that we're there for most of the time, unless you're running a law firm or unless you're running some kind of HR consultancy. HR and legal are there to support all the activities that the rest of the business does rather than being the main point, right? And when we are shunted into these more supportive roles, as opposed to sort of more technical, more core business roles, life gets less good for us. So let's talk about how we can identify whether something is part of the core business. So clue number one is if it is actually the main product of the business that you are working on. So again, like if you are literally coding the thing that you are going to sell, then that is probably part of the core business. Another test that you can do is this a function, is this function something that would be an early hire? So, you could be, if you were working on the main product, like you could be Steve Jobs or Steve Wozniak, any of the Steves really sitting in a garage building Apple products, right? you could run a company with just the Steves in the early days. You wouldn't need anybody else. And then you might, as you grew the company, build a few more hires in. But those first few hires would probably be somebody like sales, or they might be, some kind of, maybe not in the early days of Apple, but you might have somebody who's, involved in, AWS or something like that in a tech company, right? But your second hire would probably not be like an HR person. It would be unlikely because there's not enough H's to R, right? You don't have enough humans that need human resourcing yet in the company. And certainly you couldn't have just one HR person and call that Apple because there would be no product to sell. So if you are working on the main product, or if you're one of those early hires like sales, and you're probably pretty close to the core business. But if you're somebody that would be hired, once the company reaches 50 people or 3 years in, then you're still important. You're still doing important support work, but it's not that core business stuff that we're talking about here. And then a final clue for us is whether or not there's P&L responsibility. So when I say P&L responsibility, P&L stands for profit and loss. So basically, are you responsible for how this place makes money or not? Are you responsible for turning a profit within your department? So again, something like sales has P&L responsibility. Something like operations often has P&L responsibility, whereas HR or legal doesn't have it. If you have somebody in accounts payable, they're very responsible for a lot of monetary transactions, but they are not necessarily out there driving revenue. Does that make sense? Okay, so that P&L thing, by the way, is like the most core of core business responsibilities there can possibly be. And the reason why I say that is because pretty much all businesses, with the exception of nonprofits or very certain businesses, their whole point is to make money. Their whole point is profit. And so if you have profit and loss responsibility, regardless of the technical specifics of what you're up to, you are responsible for the thing that most matters, especially in a publicly traded company. Most of the time, that's what shareholders are investing for you to go and make them more money, right? So we can use P&L responsibility as a pretty good proxy for whether or not we're actually working in the core business. Are we responsible for profit and loss? Well, the cool news, friends, is that women have way less responsibility for profit and loss than men do. Overall, we've had 9% less profit and loss responsibility. This is from a 2020 survey by a group called DDI. And they recognize that P&L responsibility is a thing that is really heavily recruited for in C-suite roles, especially CEO roles. Go figure, at the top of the company, you need to be able to make sure that you can turn a profit. One of the main things that the C-suite is working on. And they really struggle to recruit people who have had P&L responsibility. It's a highly, highly coveted skill set in that tranche of leadership within a company. And women have this huge disadvantage. And it actually gets worse the more senior you get. This is hiding some surprises. So as you can see at the individual contributor level, men, 31% of them have P&L responsibility. And for women, that's 22%, so a gap of 9%, right? Same thing is true, 9% gap at the manager level, but men have a lot more responsibility over P&L, 46%, and women have 37%. But when you move into the C-suite, this changes pretty drastically. Suddenly the gap widens to 18%. So 81% of men who are in the C-suite have some sort of P&L responsibility. That's a huge number, versus women only have 63% of them with P&L. Now, this is interesting because I think it really shows how stratified the roles can be. So we talked earlier about whether you're core to the business or you're not. So probably what we're seeing here is that women tend to rise to the top of the C-suite in supportive functions. So they'll be like, a chief human resources officer, or they'll be maybe CFO or something like that. I think CFOs are still pretty dominated by men, but they tend to be more in supportive functions as opposed to in those key P&L roles. And so that's part of what we're seeing here. And the challenge is that there becomes fewer and fewer and fewer women the higher you get up, because of that wonderful graph that I showed you earlier, where the pink line goes careening down. It's very, very sad. But also because they don't get into those P&L roles early on, they don't develop the experience that they need to, run with these 81% of boys who are in those C-suite roles with all their P&L experience. So this is actually a huge problem. And I think this this thing, whether what you're doing is core to the business, P&L responsible, is this hugely under talked about thing in leadership. People talk all the time about, keeping your team happy and making sure that you're inspiring everybody and creating a strong vision and blah, 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 all this stuff. But what matters, at least according to this survey, and I agree with it, what matters is whether or not you get the experience that you need to support you moving into these roles. And by and large, women don't. So that's why we end up like this, right? That's why it's 80% dudes, or at least that's part of it. Okay, so the problem here, the problem that leads you into this quote unquote natural skills trap is not working in core areas of the business. And this is basically what happened with Lana, right? When her boss said, let's reorg you into non-technical management, he was like, hey, how about we take you away from P&L and stick you into a support role? Wouldn't you love that? Now she's still working technically. She's still going to manage software developers, but she's going to do kind of the HR side. She's not going to have any technical oversight of them, was the proposal. And so this is a support role, even though it's in this area that's in theory close to the core of the business, it's support. There's no responsibility really over what we build, how we build it. It's just, have you had your vacation? What's your performance review? Like, yuck, right? So the solution here, obviously, when you've got a boss who's trying to do this to you, is to fight like hell to stay in core areas of the business. Now, it was interesting because with Lana, initially when this happened, she wasn't like 100% opposed to this. I was very 100% opposed to this. I did not like this when she told me, but she had like a sinking feeling in her stomach about it. She's like, I don't know, I think this might not be good. But there were pieces of it that kind of added up for her. She's like, you know what, I do like that. I am good at it. And I do like supporting my team. And I think I'd be really great at that. And I think I'd add a lot of value to the company. And so there was a piece of her that was kind of tempted, right? She was like, oh, maybe I'll do this. But the more she and I talked about it, the more we realized this would not help her get where she wanted to go, because Lana wants to become a director of technology and then eventually a CTO. And so she knows that if she does this, this is like an off-ramp from the very thing that she's trying to create. Because when she takes time away to go and do this very people-y role that her boss has helpfully suggested to line up with her skill set, and I guess what she's meant to be interested in as a woman, that means that she'll lose touch a little bit with what's going on technologically, because the pace of technology is so quick. And it means that she wouldn't be able to backfill certain skills that she needed, certain technical skills that she needed to build that really strong base that she'd need to move into like a CTO type role eventually, right? And the more and more senior you get, the harder it is to backfill those things. So she had to get in a really big fight with actually the entire management team about this reorg to not end up in a situation that would have put a huge glass ceiling over her head. Like she would have been stuck there. She wouldn't have been able to get out, right? So she fought them really hard for months and months and months. And when I say she fought them, I meant she, spoke to them very politely and influenced them wonderfully, because she has all those skills that we talked about before, right? But she was very, very persistent. Nevertheless, she persisted. And hooray for Lana, she eventually convinced them. And so now she's a manager, but she has technical oversight. And she's also got the mentoring and support she needs to move into that technical director role that she's looking to move into eventually. And this is only possible because she had that conversation with them again and again and again and said, listen, one, this isn't what I want to do, but two, I actually don't think it's best for the business. It's important for me to retain a foot in the technological side, in the side of the business that, makes the trains run on time, and not just shunt me over into this pure people role, because I won't be as good of a manager and I don't think I'll serve your interests as well. So it was really good work on Lana's part, and really essential, because if she hadn't done this, it would be very hard for her to build her career from here on out. So lovely. Now we've talked about the bottom half of this graph, right? This quote unquote natural skills half of the graph, which puts you in support roles as opposed to core business roles or P&L roles at the top. So it's really essential for us to understand how the leadership training that we take pushes us down here, because there's nothing about, like, she doesn't go to leadership training and they say, never do this, don't do this. But what they do is they explicitly don't mention it. This doesn't come up. Leadership training is not focused at all on where you should position yourself within the company structure, right? And in fact, it has such a strong lens about leadership being all of these people skills that it actually pulls focus and sort of puts a magnifying glass over that one area of leadership, because leadership is not all just people stuff, right? But it puts this magnifying glass over this one area of leadership such that you can kind of forget about all the stuff around it, right? And so that happens to us, but it also happens to our bosses. That's how our bosses tend to understand leadership. And it's also, if you notice, like if you watch leadership training, or if you watch, or not watch, but rather read articles about leadership online, you'll find pervasively that they tend to go in this direction. And part of that is because they're all written by coaches, and coaches are like obsessed with people stuff. That's why they go into coaching, right? For sure. There's a piece of that. But it's also because we have this concept of leadership that it is this primarily people skills driven enterprise that is really underpinned by the fact that those are the skills that men have needed to learn to move into those roles. And so men have to focus on that to become kind of balanced professionals. And when women focus on it, because they're already so strong in it, they end up a little bit lopsided. Society loves to view them as extra lopsided, so that adds to the problem. And then there's no effective counter to it because nothing else is ever discussed. Great. Love it. Love it so much. All right, let's keep going, friends. On to number 2, what I like to call the backpack trap. That's a bit of a mouthful. Backpack trap. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about that. So we talked earlier about how there's this dividing line between the individual contributor level and manager level, where you stop creating results on your own, you start cajoling other people into doing the things you want, right? Well, the other thing that happens is you move up this sort of progression is that you increasingly move into strategic roles and out of execution roles. Now, it's not to say that execution doesn't matter at the top, but your work tends to become more strategic the more you move up. You have a broader purview, you're more responsible for setting direction as opposed to just executing on a plan that already exists. There's certainly some of that, but increasingly you're in charge of setting the agenda. And you'll notice when we look at this list that there is yet another thing missing. Not only is it missing the thing that we talked about earlier, which is, not just how should you lead your team, but like in what, right? Like to where, around P&L or around support roles, but also we're missing strategy, right? So here's the deal. The same survey. Remember I said that women were killing it, 17 out of 19. Well, here's one of the ones that we did not beat men on. Developing a strategic perspective. They beat us by 1%. So sad, but also that's the same percentage that we beat them on by communication. So who knows what that means. But yeah, we are rated by our peers as less good at developing strategic perspective as men are, which is very, very sad because it's essential moving up the chain, right? Just like those P&L roles are, developing our strategic perspective is this really important thing we have to do as we get more and more senior. So let's get into that a little more. Like, what the heck is strategy? What do I mean by this? Why am I talking about how important it is? Well, I had this amazing client years ago. She actually worked as a VP at a Fortune 500 who was working on this shift herself. She was an established leader and had a lot of experience kind of making her team function like a well-oiled machine. But she really wanted to move into higher levels of responsibility, more interesting problems. And so she was working on this shift between this execution focus that she was so good at and had been so good at for so long that got her where she was, and moving into this more strategic focus. And she described the difference between these as being like going on a hike. So that's why we have these funny looking mountain shapes on the screen. So she said that for years she had been really, really good at leading a team of hikers in the forest or on the mountain or whatever, right? And she was really good at supporting them and making sure that they had everything they needed to successfully execute this hike. She could make sure that there was everything in the backpack that they needed. She'd make sure there was the compass there. She'd get the bug spray. She'd get the tents. She'd get the sleeping bags. She'd get the trail mix, like anything that was needed for her team to have a happy and healthy and productive hike. She would be the one to provide, which is exactly what you learn in leadership training, right? How to make sure that everyone has a happy, healthy, safe, productive hike. And the thing that you do while you're doing this is that you follow somebody else's map. Somebody else gives you a map and you follow it along and lead your team along on the hike, right? But what she said she wanted to get better at was something that she loved to call putting flags on mountains. So by that, she means picking a point way off on the horizon and saying, we're hiking all the way over there. It's not going to happen today. It might not happen this month, but that's the direction that we're going in. And that's a really different can of worms, right? Going, let's summit over there, as opposed to like, we're following this little map that we have in front of us. And this strategy work is really essential. This putting flags on mountains thing is really essential because there's a lot of questions that you have to answer when you're going on a hike, right? If you've got a map in front of you, it's relatively easy, but without the map, you need to understand a little more about where you're actually going and why you're actually going there. You know, are you going on a hike that is going to be fun and wonderful and really enjoyable? Are you going on a difficult but necessary hike that you have to do so you can get somewhere really good in a couple of days? What's the overall point of all of this hiking, right? Is it for the joy of walking out and about in the woods? Is it because you're training so that you can eventually summit Mount Everest and be part of, that whole history of the world? Or heck, do you want to go and, hike eventually the entire, whatever it's called, Pacific Coast Trail and, discover yourself again and write a memoir and have it become a best-selling book and then eventually sell the movie rights and become BFFs with Reese Witherspoon or something, right? There's all kinds of different reasons that somebody might choose to be hiking. You would probably choose different hikes to meet each of those needs, right? So it's really essential that you learn how to put flags on mountains and you learn to think about all these things, because otherwise you're just sitting there reading somebody else's map. And eventually, as you move up the chain of command, the maps become, one, less plentiful. People don't tend to give you as many maps. And two, to the extent that they give you maps, they have way less detail, way less stuff filled in. And so if you don't get good at putting flags on mountains, eventually you're going to find yourself lost somewhere in the wilderness, unclear where you're going, looking for help with no real guidance and not sure how to put the flag on the mountain and get a whole team there safely, which is pretty rough, especially when you've got a CEO that's asking you to define, the next quarter's where are we hiking strategy or something like that, right? And then, eventually you stop getting promoted because you can't put the flags on the mountains. Yikes, not good. And, then it can get even worse because you could be Peloton. So I don't know if y'all have seen the news lately, but Peloton has recently had a small struggle with their strategic direction setting from the C-suite. So early on in the panini, as people I understand are calling it in the pandemic, Pelotons were like a hot commodity. They were really hard to come by. Back in the early days when we were all locked down, we were all staying at home and everyone was having a real panic that they would never be able to exercise again and they had to come up with an at-home workout routine. Pelotons were, like a black market commodity. Everybody wanted them, right? And they were selling so fast that they had a huge back order and they couldn't fulfill the massive amount of demand that was going on for their products. So they, of course, decided that they had to do something about this. And they made two big moves and then a third later move that we'll talk about in relationship to this. So thing number one that they did was they purchased a company called Precor, which is like a exercise equipment manufacturing company. So they bought this with the hopes that they could increase their own manufacturing capacity and also so that they could sell some of their equipment to these, new Pelotonites that were obsessively buying their products. So they did that in April of 2021, once the pandemic was kind of already going. Then about a month later, they decided they would invest in a huge new manufacturing facility in Ohio, again, to increase their ability to deliver their core products. So they made these two announcements in close succession early in 2021, and then promptly stopped production in January of 2022 because they had way too much inventory and demand had softened because the world is opening back up. And it turns out that people would rather work out at the gym or at a yoga studio or even outside rather than ride a bike at home that costs $2,000 or more. And so as a result, their demand softened and they had increased production so much that they had a huge challenge where they actually just straight up ran out of place to put the bikes that they had spent so much money and time making. So this was some poor decision making from the CEO, John Foley. And for those of you who have not already read this, you'll notice in the last couple of days that Peloton has been absolutely eviscerated by an activist shareholder who was very upset about these decisions, amongst other things, to do with poor old Johnny Boy. And they have released like a, I don't know, 40-page PowerPoint about why John is a terrible CEO and should be ousted. And they were successful. He did get ousted. And here's some of why, okay? So when they made these decisions, they cost a lot of money. So the Precor purchase cost $430 million, and the Ohio factory was $400 million. And so overall, they spent $830 million on dropping their stock price by 24% when they made these announcements that they were mothballing production. Yikes. Not great return, John, on your investment of $800 million just to lose a whole bunch of market cap. And actually, over the course of the last year, like, fully 1 year ago today, Peloton lost $29 billion worth of market cap on their bad decision making. And this is because the CEO, John Foley, didn't have a good handle on the strategy. He could not figure out what mountain they should be climbing, where to plant the flag, or rather, he planted the flag, and he planted it in a deeply silly spot, and then the execution wasn't really good. So not ideal. And John basically rode one of his little Peloton stationary bikes all the way down these mountains instead of in the directions that the shareholders hoped for. And then eventually he got turfed. Yikes. So strategy is really essential for CEOs. That's clear, especially if you want to run an electric bike company in the middle of a pandemic. Very important. Otherwise, you'll tend to get fired and won't have a lot of future in your career. So some of you might be thinking now, like, okay, look, I'm not a CEO. Can I just wait a couple of years, get an MBA? Isn't that what this is for? Like, Holly, we're sitting here talking about leadership training, but like, is leadership training really supposed to teach us all of this? Isn't that why I'd go to Harvard or, SFU or something, right? And yeah, you can do that, but actually you need strategy a lot earlier than this. It's not something that can wait until you get to the director level or the VP level. You actually need it way early in your career. I actually think you need it at the IC level when you're still working just yourself on work. You need to understand strategy. You need to be able to put flags on mountains, even if they're smaller mountains at that point. You still need to be able to do that, or at least understand how and why people are putting flags on mountains. So it's essential basically everywhere along this timeline. So what happens if you don't learn it? Other than, the massive flame out of poor John Foley at Peloton, what'll happen to you earlier in your career? So here's the backpack trap that I mentioned we were going to talk about. Okay. So this is another client. We will call her Wanda. And Wanda is an engineering manager. She's a relatively experienced engineering manager. She's not at the stage anymore where she's going into meetings like just white knuckling it, hoping she can, survive giving a performance review to her staff without one of them crying. She's kind of got all that down pat, and the team is working. The team is humming along and doing great. And I was coaching her a little while ago, and she said, today for my coaching request, I want to talk about what I should do next. Now that the team is working great, and everything is going well, what do I focus on? What's my next big gig? And she had a whole bunch of ideas. She said, well, should I revamp my one-on-ones and try to make those better and more efficient for the team and more supportive? Should I build a brand new schedule for my team so that we've got meetings all clumped together on certain days and long periods of focus time and other days and maybe entire days without meetings so we can all be more effective and efficient at getting our work done and maybe produce more? She said, maybe I should, sit down with all of my team and ask them what their goals are and try to work with them on whatever those are so that they feel more fulfilled and more like their career is developing in an interesting direction. Or maybe, in service of the exact same thing, I'll work with HR to build a career roadmap for all of them so that they can see, if they stay at this company for 3 years, what role are they going to be in? What's the path from, junior developer to senior developer, and what skills do they need to have to do all of those things? And you can see on the right side, my expression is getting increasingly shocked and concerned. And it's not because these aren't good ideas. These are interesting ideas, and they're ideas that would probably be really supportive for Wanda's team. But these are all, she's packing her backpack here. These are all backpack ideas, right? She's stocking up on all the things that will make for a happy and efficient and lovely hike for her team members. And there's not a lot in here that focuses on those core business things that we talked about earlier. And none of this is particularly strategic. Like, there's some process improvement stuff, in terms of the meetings. But none of it feels really big picture. And so it's okay, but I'm really curious, right? Like we could do any of those, but why? Why these things? Why are these the ones making the list? And then she said, oh, because it's my job to keep the team happy. I'm the manager, that's my job. And then I almost fell off my chair. I almost died. I was so tragic about it because it's a lovely thing that she said, right? It is her job in some ways to keep her team happy, but in a very real way, that's not the job. That's not the manager job. It's a piece of the manager job, but it's not it, right? The manager's job is not keeping the team happy. In fact, sometimes it's actually actively upsetting the team, hopefully not maliciously or on purpose, but the manager's job is actually to do the thing that moves the business forward. And that is not always the thing that keeps the team happy, number one. And number two, the thing that keeps the team most happy is not always the thing that's best for the business. And so because she had this lens on of my job is to keep the team happy, which where would she have gotten that? Leadership training, of course, and the way that we hold leadership as being mostly about empowering our team, right? Because of that lens that she held, she was entirely focused on the backpack and not at all focused on all of the cool mountains she could be summiting. She wasn't even looking up. She was like, head down, pack in the backpack. No visibility whatsoever into all of these amazing peaks that they could climb and all of the peaks that management would be excited about and that she would be excited about and that would feel exhilarating and amazing and be great career development for her to climb, but also even all the peaks that would be great for her team to climb. It's not a bad thing to hold a lens that you want to support your team, but you can also support your team by getting them to do really exciting strategic work, right? You can pick a peak that management cares about, that you're interested in, that will be a stretch goal for a team, and then you can support them in getting there and help them get that on your resume, right? But none of this was what was showing up on her list. She was so focused on the backpack that she missed all the amazing mountain climbing that she actually had like license to do. It wasn't that her manager was going to get in the way. They weren't going to try to shunt her away into some people only management thing. She was kind of shunting herself because she was so focused on the backpack. Yikes. So, and then what ends up happening typically in these scenarios is the boss goes, well, she's not very strategic. Maybe she needs another year to develop, right? She's doing good at managing, team's executing okay. I'm not seeing a lot of strategy out of her. So I'm not quite ready to promote her up another level. I don't know if that's actually going to be in her skill set, but we'll see how it goes. Wait a little longer. And then 20 years later, when she's still stuck in the same job with white hair, she's completely bored being a people-focused manager, and it sucks. And she's there because she never got her eyes out of the backpack because she understood the backpack to be the job. And nobody corrected her, right? Because they go, well, that's just how it is. That's what she's good at. So this is a tragedy for me. It's very upsetting, right? And the problem here is that she did exactly what she was trained to do. She did what she understood the role to be as people had explained it to her. And that sucks, right? Like if this wasn't what she was supposed to do, if people tried to warn her out of it and then she did it anyways, you might be able to understand it. But the sad thing is, like, she ticked off every box. She did everything right. And then she still ended up in this place where the glass ceiling was like right above her potentially, right? And so she was so busy supporting and executing alongside her team that she didn't have any time for all the flag putting on mountains, right? And our leadership training, the way that we talk about this really seeds the backpack, right? It makes it so that that's what we focus on instead of the bigger picture, because we don't talk about the bigger picture most of the time in leadership training. We talk about those micro interactions, which is really good because we need to learn those skills. But to focus on that to the exclusion of everything else is really, really harmful to women because they miss that message. And like we talked about earlier with Lana, people tend to funnel them towards that people only lens anyways. And so it never changes or gets corrected, or often doesn't change or get corrected. Okay, so the solution here is to go and create some strategic projects for yourself. Go find something good that's aligned with company strategy to do. Now, with Wanda, this was not something that was immediately obvious. She had spent so much time focused in the backpack that she didn't even know how to look for a mountain. Like, it was not in her vocabulary, and she wasn't sure what was important to the company, and she didn't really know where they were trying to go or what they were trying to build. It wasn't something that got talked about with her very often. So I gave her some homework to go and find out, like go and talk to your manager and your manager's manager and eventually the CTO and find out what the heck they're up to. And the interesting thing is when she did that, what she discovered was they also didn't know. They didn't really have a clear strategy either. They were in that kind of like startup-y phase where they've had some success and now it's all chaos and they're growing. And so they're just like throwing spaghetti at the wall, trying to execute, trying to catch up and see what works and barely survive the thing, but they hadn't actually stopped to look around and go, hold on, what mountain are we climbing? What mountain do we want to be climbing? So when she asked, a couple of really interesting things happened. One, she got to find out the answer and they got to find out the answer and they found it out together. So she got to be involved in those discussions about what would come next and what that would look like. And not only that, they got to be able to see her as a resource. She wasn't somebody who was asking because she didn't know. She was somebody who was the one to pull their heads up so that they could look around. It actually made her look more strategic that she went, hold on a second, where are we going and why are we doing this? That was a really good look for her and it helped them see her as having more strategic skills than she otherwise would have if she had kind of waited for direction, right? So when I say create some strategic projects for yourself, if you know what they are, great, go do them. But if you don't know, go start having conversations and find out what they should be so that you can create them. That works great. And the amazing news here with lovely Wanda is that she's now a senior engineering manager. Hooray! And she got to do some interesting strategic projects along the way once they figured out what the heck the strategy was supposed to be. And she was able to shift her focus away from the backpack entirely. She's still a lovely manager, still wonderful to work for, but she's got the team repositioned and working on something more interesting, which I think is great. Okay, friends, my favorite graph, once again, at the tail end of our talk here. So it's really essential to me that we don't fall into this backpack trap on the left-hand side of the graph, where we're so focused on execution and we're so busy supporting our team at that execution that we don't ever take a second to look up and go, hold on, all this effort that we're putting in, all this doing that we're doing, where should it be pointed? Is it pointed in the most helpful direction for us? Or are we just executing really well? And you know, I don't have slides around this because this is already a long enough presentation, but if we don't do this, what ends up happening is, and I've actually got a whole talk about it, is we end up stuck in what I like to call the competency trap, where we're just so good at executing that people will continually throw more execution work on our plate. And the hallmark of this in my clients is they call me up and they say, I'm exhausted, I'm doing 2 people's jobs and I haven't gotten a raise in 5 years. That's the competency trap, right? So if you become a really competent executor, but if you're not executing on anything that's strategic, that's where you end up. Execution on strategic stuff is great, but execution on sort of busy work is less good. And I can't place exactly where I saw this statistic in the last couple of days, but I did see a study that said that women and men comparing their productivity at work, both of them get about 66% of what they're assigned to do done, but women are more productive because they get assigned 10% more tasks. And so the risk for becoming this sort of workhorse of execution is really high. One, because you're executing 10% more than most other people, even though you're completing the same amount of stuff. But also 2, because people tend to shunt non-interesting work towards women, like non-strategic works get shunted towards women. And so the pattern that this sets up is that you are more productive at getting more work done that doesn't matter, which is not ideal. And then you end up over here in the self-reinforcing backpack trap, supporting everybody else doing cool work, which is very sad because you could just be doing cool work. Okay, friends, so this graph, please don't spend any time working towards the bottom left-hand corner. Spend all of your time working towards the upper right-hand corner. Focus your work on things that are core to the business and make sure that you're looking at your work through a strategic lens, not just how well are we executing, not just how well are we facilitating others to execute it, but how do we do this? Where should we do this? What should we be pointing at to make sure that we're making the most of this for the company? These two things are really essential, and they don't get taught at all in leadership training. In fact, leadership training teaches kind of the opposite of it. It reinforces the sides of this quadrangle, I guess. It reinforces the sides of this quadrangle that are already, for most women, overstrong, that are already, for most women, overemphasized in society. And it completely ignores the two key pieces that actually help you move up the leadership ladder. So, as I said at the beginning of the training, my current view on the world is like, I don't want to hear about anything that doesn't move people towards the upper right-hand side of this graph. And I highly recommend, as you look at leadership training options or professional development options for yourself over the next year, for your team over the next year, if you've got friends or colleagues who are like, I want to take this thing, should I do it? Look at it through this lens and go, is it going to help me move up and to the right? And if it's not, like, don't waste your time. Unless you think it's going to be helpful. Sometimes we do need to learn how to give good feedback at work and, stuff like that. Go and learn the skills you need to do the work, but make sure that you're learning the strategy skills, and make sure you're learning those core business technical skills, because otherwise you'll end up left behind, which is not a thing I want for any of you. If I wanted y'all to be left behind, I would not spend all the time I spend running WIMDI, right? It would be so much easier not to. Okay, so hopefully y'all remember this. Take a picture of this in your mind or with your phone. Please don't fall into these traps. And if you do fall into these traps, talk to me, because as you can see, I've gotten people out of these traps before, and I will happily get you out of this quicksand, because I hate it. I hate this quicksand, and I'm very done with it.